Hello everyone, I'm Jenni Matthews, Head of Marketing for MRI On Location for Footfall Analytics, formerly known as MRI Springboard, and I'd like to share with you the monthly highlights from July. MRI Software is a leading provider of real estate software solutions that transform the way communities live, work and play. MRI's open and connected AI-first platform empowers owners, operators and occupiers in commercial and residential property organisations to innovate in rapidly changing markets. We have been a trailblazer in the PropTech industry for over 5 decades, serving more than 6 million users worldwide. In this short webinar, we take a look at footfall performance since the start of the year, but firstly, let's set the scene with pre-pandemic metrics. This chart demonstrates that in every year before 2020, up to 2019, we had a decline in footfall, with some years showing only a marginal decline, and this was associated with a structural shift that was ongoing in retail, as consumers were browsing and using the internet more and more, and of course that meant that we took fewer and fewer trips to retail destination, which in turn impacts footfall. Pre-pandemic, retail parks were the strongest out of the 3 destination types we monitor. High streets and shopping centres both saw an overall decline in footfall, whilst retail parks saw a slight increase. And this was an average decline of just under 2% each year, whereas retail parks saw an average increase of 0.6%. City centres were stronger than smaller high streets. So when people were talking about the death of the high street, they were really talking about the death of a small high street. The drop in footfall in small high streets was nearly double that in the bigger cities. For example, outer London and market towns saw over a 2% drop compared with a 1% drop in regional cities, and central London was even less than that. So where do we stand today in a post-pandemic world, and what does the road to recovery look like? By the end of August this year, footfall was 11% below the 2019 level, which shows the level of recovery from when it was 85% lower than 2019 back in April 2020 at the height of the pandemic. It's great to see the trend in recovery. However, it's worth noting that some of that drop isn't just down to COVID. We also have to take into account the growth in online shopping and the economic pressures facing all of us. In addition to looking at the recovery from 2019, we're also examining the growth over the last 12 months. The growth we see in this chart is actually diminishing in magnitude, and this is to be expected when we see a large amount of growth very early on. By the time we reached August this year, the annual increase in footfall was 1.9% from August last year. So whilst this is a natural occurrence, we do also have to factor in the economic issues. Let's now take a look at performance across the 3 destination types. The chart on the left represents year-on-year performance, and we can see that footfall across high streets is up by 6.9%, outperforming shopping centres and retail parks. Retail parks saw an annual uplift in footfall of just over 1%. However, they didn't really see much of a decline, so they wouldn't expect to see such a significant uplift. However, if we look at this against 2019, there is still a gap. High streets are at around 14% below the 2019 level. It sits at minus 15.5% in shopping centres, but only about 2% lower in retail parks, which demonstrates their resiliency. One of the key changes we've seen is the much stronger recovery at the weekend in high streets and shopping centres. There are still gains to be made as high street footfall is still 9% below the 2019 level during the weekend and almost 15% below during the weekday period. However, there are marginal shifts in high streets across each of the days within the week, with clear growth on Saturday and Sunday over the last year compared with 2019. This is because we're not in our high streets as much as we used to be back in 2019, so we tend to go out more at the weekend, and this is a trend that we're likely to see escalate over the years. If we look at this on a deeper level, we can see slightly different patterns of activity on Saturday and Sunday. The graph on the left shows performance on Saturday was much higher this year compared with Saturday in 2019, up until May. However, it's starting to drop back again as we enter the second half of the year. The chart on the right shows performance on Sunday has grown steadily and remains higher than 2019. We can see that the weekday versus weekend split is fueled primarily through hybrid working, which has impacted footfall at different times of the day, with the early mornings being hit the worst as it sits at around 20% below the 2019 level, which pre-pandemic would normally be the time we would all be heading into town centres to go into the office. However, let's look at the day parts where footfall hasn't been impacted as much, the afternoons and the early evenings. This could be due to office workers opting to go into offices later in the day, whether it's for collaborative projects, team meetings, or to avoid the peak commuter period altogether. If we then look at city centres compared with smaller high streets, we can see that central London versus outer London demonstrates the impact of hybrid working, as the gap from the 2019 level in central London is much wider compared with outer London, and that's down to the proportion of people who work at home for at least part of the week, still continuing to do so. Footfall in central London hasn't bounced back as much as it has in outer London. And then when we look at market towns against regional cities outside of the capital on the right, the picture is slightly different as it demonstrates market towns being much more resilient. However, as we progress through the years up to now, regional cities have started to bounce back, and the gap from the 2019 level is much smaller in regional cities than it is in local high streets now. This chart demonstrates how central London has recovered since 2020 compared with outer London, and both lines show consistent recovery. Even the gap between the two lines has remained consistent, but as we move through 2023, the gap is beginning to narrow. The year-on-year change by month is much bigger in central London if we look to the left of the chart. If we look back at the last 6 months to today, it's clear that the recovery period is now taking place. If we look at market towns compared with city centres across the UK, it's clear that market towns have been much more resilient in their recovery up until May last year. And then a crossover happened, where regional cities accelerated their recovery, and this is continuing to grow. This gap appears to be widening, and also there are bigger uplifts year on year in each month this year in regional cities than in market towns. This is due to the fact that people are going back into their offices and they're starting to shop in larger cities again. Here we take a closer look at the recovery of individual towns this year versus last year. 73% of towns have seen an uplift from last year, and this is an average across the year from January through to the end of August. Some of the towns in red may have seen recovery this year and may be above 2019 levels for part of the year, but over the year as a whole, they're still in a negative position. The key takeaway here is that almost 3/4 of all towns are seeing annual increases in footfall. However, looking back at recovery from 2019 levels, the picture is reversed, with only 15% of towns sitting above the 2019 level. Unfortunately, quite a lot of towns may never get back to 2019 levels, and that's nothing to do with the town itself, but more so a reflection in terms of how consumer behaviour has changed in the way we work and the way we shop. If these insights have whetted your appetite for more, then be sure to head online to subscribe for our benchmarks and get them delivered directly to your inbox weekly or monthly, or check out our resource library for the latest on-demand content. Thank you so much for your time.